Mica Miller was just 30 years old when her life came to a sudden and tragic end on April 27, 2024, a death that would ignite national attention, endless speculation, and a storm of controversy surrounding the circumstances of her final moments. For 7 years she had been married to John Paul Miller, a pastor at Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and when the pastor's wife was discovered dead in a quiet state park with a single gunshot wound to the head, the official explanation that soon followed was one many people simply could not accept. As details about Mica's life, her marriage, and the events leading up to that day slowly emerged, family members, friends, former churchgoers, and online commentators began raising troubling questions. Some believed evidence pointed to a tragic suicide, but others insisted there was a darker truth hidden beneath the surface, arguing that Mica Miller had not chosen her own fate at all. Instead, they believed she had been murdered. The story begins years earlier when Mica first met John Paul Miller, often referred to as JP, when she was only 14 years old. Her family had recently begun attending services at Solid Rock Church, where JP worked as a youth pastor and was gradually gaining influence within the church community. Over time, Mica became deeply involved in church activities and developed close ties to many members, including JP himself. When she turned 18, JP officiated her wedding to one of his close friends, a man named Jeremy who also served in the church. Both Mica and Jeremy were active participants in church life. Jeremy ran the sports ministry while Mica worked in media and communications, helping with graphic design and church events. Eventually, Mica began assisting JP more directly, working as his secretary and sometimes babysitting for his children. At the time, JP was still married to his wife Allison, but everything changed in 2015 when Allison reportedly discovered JP and Mica together in a compromising situation. The revelation of their affair shook the church community and ultimately led to the collapse of both marriages. By 2016, Jeremy and Allison had each filed for divorce and distanced themselves from the church, while JP and Mica continued their relationship openly. Just a year later, when Mica was only 23 years old, she married JP, becoming stepmother to his 5 children. On the surface, the couple appeared to build a life centered around their church and ministry. Mica embraced her role as the pastor's wife, leading worship services, managing youth and women's ministries, creating graphics for church media, and even participating in international mission trips, including work in Kenya where the church supported education and religious outreach programs. She loved music and was often seen singing during church services, her voice becoming familiar to many in the congregation. But behind the public image of a devoted pastor's family, those closest to Mica say her marriage was far from happy. Over the years, she reportedly attempted several times to leave JP, confiding in friends and family that the relationship had become emotionally and psychologically damaging. In January 2023, she made a bold attempt to start over by moving to Kansas to live with relatives and begin a new chapter of her life. There she joined another church, formed new friendships, and seemed hopeful about rebuilding her future. Yet only a few months later, she suddenly returned to South Carolina, sending a brief message explaining that she had reconciled with her husband. To those who knew her well, the abrupt change felt strange and unsettling, as though something had pressured her into returning. Once back in Myrtle Beach, the relationship reportedly deteriorated again. Mica began posting messages on social media that hinted at emotional pain and spiritual conflict, speaking about abuse and the struggle many people face when trying to reconcile religious beliefs with the need to leave an unhealthy marriage. In one message, she reflected on the idea that God hates divorce, but questioned how God might feel about abuse and suffering within a marriage, suggesting that spiritual teachings should not trap someone in a harmful situation. Later that year, Mica filed for divorce in October 2023. But the situation became even more complicated when she withdrew the filing several months later and was involuntarily admitted to a hospital for mental health treatment. According to Mica, her husband had arranged the commitment and had taken her wallet, keys, and car. When she was eventually released, she reported her vehicle stolen to police, though officers explained that because the couple was still legally married, the car was considered marital property and therefore not technically stolen. JP told authorities that his wife struggled with mental health issues and experienced episodes each year around the holidays, claiming he had taken the car to prevent her from making impulsive decisions. Around the same time, Mica began telling friends she believed she was being followed or monitored. On 2 separate occasions, the tires of her vehicle were slashed, and during repairs, a mechanic discovered a GPS tracking device attached underneath the car. Mica suspected JP had placed the device there to monitor her movements, But when she reported it to police, he insisted the tracker had been installed for her safety because of her mental health concerns. Again, because the vehicle belonged to both of them legally, officers took no action. The situation grew even more disturbing when Mica reported that an intimate photograph she had once sent privately to her husband appeared online. She believed JP was responsible for posting it, though authorities said they could not prove who had uploaded the image since it had been shared anonymously and partially censored. In her final weeks, Mica appeared determined to separate from her husband once and for all. She changed her phone number multiple times, limited contact with others, and told friends she feared for her safety. According to an affidavit from her sister Sierra, Mica even made a chilling remark shortly before her death, saying that if she ever ended up with a bullet in her head, it would not be by her own hand. Then, only 2 days after JP was served with divorce papers in April 2024, Mica was found dead. On the afternoon of April 27th, a fisherman named Johnny Jacobs was boating quietly along the Lumber River in North Carolina when he heard faint crying somewhere downstream. The sound continued for several minutes before suddenly stopping, and shortly afterward a single gunshot echoed through the forest. Disturbed by what he heard, Jacobs later moved closer to the riverbank where he discovered a backpack containing a phone, glasses, keys, identification, and a small Bible. Emergency responders were called and began searching the area, and about 90 minutes later a kayaker discovered Mica's body in the water. Investigators quickly located her black Honda Accord in the park parking lot, and inside they found a gun case, ammunition, and a receipt showing she had purchased a Sig Sauer 9mm handgun earlier that same day at a pawn shop in Myrtle Beach. Security footage later confirmed that Mica had entered the store alone, legally purchased the firearm, and left shortly afterward. Phone records also revealed that she had searched online for directions to Lumber River State Park before driving there. When authorities reviewed the evidence, they also discovered a 911 call placed from Mica's phone after she arrived at the park. During the call, she calmly told the dispatcher she was at the park and wanted her family to know where to find her. According to investigators, she then stated her intention to end her life. When the coroner's report was released, it concluded that Mica had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, officially ruling the death a suicide. But many people refused to accept that explanation. Friends pointed out that Mica had upcoming plans, including appointments and church commitments, and had seemed hopeful about starting a new life after leaving her husband. Her family believed the circumstances surrounding her marriage and the allegations of abuse suggested something far more sinister. Suspicion intensified when JP announced Mica's death to his congregation, less than 24 hours after her body was discovered, telling church members that her death had been self-induced and referencing her mental health struggles even though the official investigation had not yet reached that conclusion. Critics felt the announcement was unusually calm and detached for someone who had just lost his wife. As scrutiny of JP grew, stories about his past began surfacing online, including a decades-old criminal incident involving reckless driving and allegations from former church members who accused him of inappropriate relationships and misconduct. Reports also circulated that he had been involved in an affair with another church member, raising further questions about his personal life. None of these allegations directly proved involvement in Mica's death, and investigators later confirmed that JP had been attending a sporting event in Charleston, roughly 3 hours away at the time Mica died, supported by eyewitness accounts and license plate tracking data. Still, the speculation refused to fade. Mica's family also criticized aspects of the investigation, noting that her body was cremated quickly and that some procedures they expected, such as toxicology testing, were not completed. They continued reviewing Mica's personal journals and documents, believing they might contain evidence of abuse or manipulation that could explain the events leading up to her death. Meanwhile, conspiracy theories spread rapidly online, with some people claiming the 911 call had been fabricated or altered, others accusing the fisherman who discovered the scene, and still others suggesting a wider cover-up. The sheriff's office eventually released a detailed timeline of evidence supporting the suicide ruling, stating that despite widespread rumors, the facts pointed clearly to Mica acting alone. Yet even after the case was officially closed, debate surrounding the tragedy continues. For some, the evidence is convincing and the conclusion unavoidable. For others, the troubling history of Mica's marriage, the allegations of control and abuse, and the strange circumstances leading up to that final day leave lingering doubts that may never fully disappear. The tragic story of Mica Miller remains one of grief, unanswered questions, and a community still struggling to understand what truly happened in the quiet woods along the Lumber River on that spring afternoon.